welcome to Early Bird Anime. I'm Meg,
And I'm Dan.
and we like to talk about anime, so let's get our Ramblepants on because today we're talking about Baccano.
All right. My ramble pants are tight today.
Good. They're gonna need to be.
I didn't let them dry, air dry.
So, Baccano, which is Italian for ruckus, apparently, is an anime based off of a series of light novels by Narita Ryogo and illustrated by Enami Katsumi. It has 21 volumes, it began in 2003, and it is still ongoing. The anime series has 13 episodes and 3 OVAs, which aired in 2007 from the studio Brains Base. The director was Omori Takahiro, who also did Hellgirl and Durarara. It was licensed in the US by Funimation and Aniplex, although Funimation's license just expired this past February. And there are 2 manga adaptations. One ran from 2006 to 2008 and was 2 volumes, and the second one began in 2015 and is still ongoing. The anime series has a mature audience rating because it is very violent and very bloody.
So if you're below 17, you can't watch this episode.
Yeah. So Daniel, do you want to give a brief summary?
Yeah. Sure, I'll do a little brief summary. Baccano, a good chunk of it takes place in 1930s Prohibition era New York. The main plot sort of unfolds before a series of gangsters, immortals, and various other figures fighting a turf war, trying to carry out various plots on a train, and also finding out the mystery of a long lost, well, not long lost, but a long lost brother, I guess you could say.
Yeah, so there are 3 different main plots.
Yeah.
So the turf wars, the train thing, and the brother search.
Yeah. There are hosts, a variety of colorful, eclectic characters in the show, and we'll talk about them in a little bit. But what were your opening thoughts? You know, what do you think of Baccano?
I love Baccano.
Yeah, I do too.
Like,
it's amazing.
it's amazing. It's basically like a Tarantino movie in anime form.
Yeah, and by that we mean the structure of how the story is framed. It has a lot of very character jumping narratives. The plot's told out of order, you know, and somehow the story makes more sense when told in that way, or is more enjoyable to digest, in my opinion, at least.
I think so too, rather than if it was just a chronological storytelling of this happened and then that happened.
Yeah.
Part of the fun of it is seeing where the characters pop up next.
Yeah, and I mean, for me, the main draw that I loved the most was the characters, because when you have a show that that is complicated like that jumps narratives, it helps when you have such an interesting collection of people. And for me, it was almost like a psychological case study, trying to pinpoint what this guy's motives were, or why this girl is staying with that guy, or all these interesting little bits going on. Some people don't know this about that guy. It's a good mystery action brawler, I guess you could call it.
Yeah.
Without, being, I guess, pigeonholed as a brawler of some sort. It's very story driven too, which was what I really liked. And to me, one of the main standout things, you say Tarantino, I think that was the first thought I had when I saw this. To go beyond that, I think it has a very Slaughterhouse-5 sort of style to it, in that way the story's told too, because it jumps around in time, not just within short spans of time, but sometimes years, hundreds of years, a week, a day. It's really, really an interesting show.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the show opens with, and I think this is one of the really interesting parts about this anime, is that it opens with a discussion between these 2 characters. One is a little girl named Carol, and the other is an older man who is the vice president of a newspaper company / information broker place that comes into play later on in the story. It has a role in the story, but these 2 characters don't have a main role per se in the story. They're not characters that are, seen throughout the series. They're seen in the first episode, and they're seen at the very end of the last OVA. And it begins with a discussion of the events of this show as a story.
Yeah.
So you have the little girl looking through these newspaper articles and talking to the vice president about where they should begin to tell this story. And that was a really interesting thing to do because it kind of frames the story as opposed to just kind of throwing you right in.
Yeah, which would be very jarring. I think it would be very hard to grasp onto. Try to come to grips and take that story head on. So by having them, have this discussion about, the beginnings of a story, does a story need a main character? How, where one person leaves off, another one picks it up. It's really interesting. I mean, if you're a writer or an aspiring writer, that's really interesting.
Yeah, definitely.
From that sort of meta perspective. But also, like, to watch it, it's a little slow, but I really like it because it takes itself, like as you said, as a story.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that the first time you're watching this show, it can be a little bit slow, and it's kind of hard to understand what they're trying to go for here. And you have these two characters talking interspersed with like shots of gangsters shooting up a store,
Yeah.
or policemen looking for survivors along a railroad, and even with the ease in of Carol and the vice president, it's kind of confusing, and you don't get everything that's happening because it's just throwing a whole bunch of characters at you and a whole bunch of scenarios at you. It's basically like a teaser. This is what's going to come.
Yeah.
This is the kind of story this is going to be. And I definitely think that rewatching it makes a lot more sense and
Yeah.
is a lot more enjoyable. And
Yeah.
you because once you've watched it already, you know who all the characters are. You can look at it and say,
Yeah.
okay, now I know what's going on here. Oh, so this was the little bit of backstory that they mentioned in this episode, and I
Mhm.
think it's really fascinating. And then they bookend it
Yeah.
with
It's a very genius way to ease you in. Like you said, it's going to be this kind of story. So it helps when you have these characters talking about this story is complicated. So then you're not just going in expecting, some sort of, I wouldn't say run of the mill anime, but you're going into it and watching that opening scene, and now you know, okay, there are gonna be things that are confusing. So maybe that helps the audience become a little bit more engaged in trying to pay attention and pick out characters.
yeah. Yeah,
And
because you don't go into it expecting this is going to be a linear story where it's just boom, 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 this happens, because the characters are saying, oh, well, when you're talking about these events, where should you start? Do you want to start where it chronologically began in 1711?
yeah,
Or should we start in 1932 when this character became the head of the Martijo family?
yeah, it's like it was interesting to me because it just, I don't know. I think we've talked a little bit about the characters before, and I've said it's my favorite part about the show, but I really cannot stress how enjoyable they are. Who are some of your favorite characters from the show?
Oh my goodness. That's really hard to say because I love all of the characters. My favorite one is probably one that I don't necessarily want to talk too much about because of spoilers,
Yeah.
but I'll just say that he has the biggest ego. He has the ego pretty much the size of the planet.
Okay, I know who
And
you're talking about now.
yes, you do. And while that could be really annoying and frustrating to me in another context in other characters, I love it in
Yeah.
this character. And just everyone is so bonkers
Yeah.
in their own like unique ways. So if we were to give a really brief description of some of the really standout characters,
Yeah.
you have Isaac and Miria. I think everybody thinks of them right off
I would
the
say
bat.
they're sort of one of the standout ones. I wouldn't say the poster children of the show, but definitely they're the first you see in the intro, which
Yep.
I think we'll talk about in a minute.
Yes,
but,
we will.
And they're also the last characters you see in the intro. But they start the show and they end the show too.
Yeah. So there are a couple of thieves who are just the most head in the clouds, happy-go-lucky, naive characters. They're just so crazy and happy, and they do crazy things, like they want to steal a museum, but they obviously can't steal the museum, so they decide they're going to steal the entrance so that nobody else can get in, which
Yeah,
leads
or
to them literally just like lugging off the doors dressed in mummy costumes.
yeah, or they steal all the watches in New York City, so they stole time, and they all, and that, like you just said, they dress up as mummies for whatever reason. They like to dress up in strange costumes, and
It really
it's
flashy.
it really, yeah, really flashy, and that's somehow that helps them get away because everyone is just they think they're just street performers or something.
It's great.
Yeah,
You have Lad Russo, who
yeah.
is a
Oh.
member of the Russo family, and he loves killing people. He is pretty
Like
off his rockers.
the most sociopathic character I think I've ever seen in anything.
Yep,
But
he
he,
just
I
loves
like, and it's
killing.
weird because I'm usually not someone who says the villain is my favorite character, but I'd say he's definitely one of my favorites just because he's so interesting and captivating in his
Hmm.
craziness, and you kind of want to watch him. He's like I wouldn't say he's like the Joker to me, but you want to watch him
But that's the
and see
thing.
how the world unfolds before him.
But that's the thing. He's not even necessarily the villain.
Yeah, he's not the villain,
He's
but
the he's the villain, I guess, to certain people,
yeah,
depending on whose perspective you're looking at. And that's something that Carol and the vice president were talking about too. That there are as
yeah,
many truths as there are people who were in a story.
yeah.
You know, like he gets a good amount of screen time. You get a good amount of insight into his motives, but
Mhm.
there's not really there's not really moral judgment passed on any of these characters by the story.
No, like it's, which is funny because some of them are crazy. Like
And
Lad, he's a
some of them
crazy
are
person.
horrible people. Lad is an awful person.
Yeah, and yet you find the story finds ways to frame, I guess, whatever agenda, without giving anything away. He like as interesting, or not even, I wouldn't say sympathetic, but in a way where you sort of try to understand him.
You enjoy
Or
watching
yeah,
him.
or we can even go back to Isaac and Miria, who are thieves, and stealing is wrong in most cultural
Hmm.
standards, and yet they stand out as one of like the shining characters of the. I mean, all the characters shine, but they're
Well,
like
for them,
they're loved, and even by the community, they're just like we think they're just great.
I mean, for Isaac and Miri, I think it also helps that they've decided to change their ways and only steal from people who do bad things, like the mafia. So
Yeah,
it's a little bit of like a, maybe not a Robin Hood mentality because they don't go like giving to the poor after that, but they have a kind of
they have a sort of
innocence to
righteous,
them.
a righteous innocence.
Yeah.
I would
Um,
call that. And then you have characters like Jacuzzi and Nice, who are, I mean, when I first watched the show, I thought they were like anarchists, but they're sort of their own rival gang.
they're a gang. Jacuzzi Splot is the great name, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
Jacuzzi Splot is the leader of this gang, and he's a delinquent. He
He's a
has a
delinquent.
big tattoo of a sword on his face, and he is a crybaby and a coward. Well, maybe not a coward, but he's a crybaby, and he doesn't want to get into tough situations or anything, but he can definitely like step it up when he needs to. And then
Yeah.
Niece Hollistone is his girlfriend, and she is a pyro who's just covered in burn scars. She has a missing eye. She's boss.
Yeah, like, all the characters are so. You just want to watch it, and that's. Also, I think the length of the show being only 16 episodes, like, it makes you really want to stick with it and be like, I can't wait to see so and so again. And
Oh
the
yeah.
show, jumps around between certain characters, and you might only see these characters in this situation, so
Mhm.
you're really like on the edge, like when they go to a cliffhanger, or they just they'll say we'll come back to this, but we gotta go over here. It makes you just want to tune in for the next one, even though the upcoming plot might be just as interesting.
Oh
You'll
yeah.
probably have favorites, and it makes it all the more enjoyable when they come up.
The
And
build up and the cliffhangers are really great. And it's
yeah,
also really fun to see characters pop up where you wouldn't expect it. And that's
yeah,
another thing that I really like about this show is that you have all of these different plots that seem unrelated, but
mhm,
then they all come together and they crisscross and they intertwine, and characters will, if even if a character doesn't pop up physically, there might be a mention of something that they did that you find out they did later on in the series.
mhm,
So, for example, Isaac and Miria mention among their exploits as stealing the family fortune of some big rich family in
Yeah.
order to prevent the children from squabbling over the money. And then later on in the series, you find out that the inheritance they stole was actually the inheritance of, well, I don't know, with a spoilers, mild spoilers
Yeah.
warning,
There you go.
was actually the fortune of the Genowards, which is part of why Dallas is so angry in the Dallas Genoward is so angry in like the parts where he is, and you know.
Yeah. And if we can, when we review a show, we usually talk about a specific episode or maybe series. But for me, I'd like to talk about just the intro.
The intro is amazing.
Because like you were saying with the intercrossing, twisting, the intro, is not just any run-of-the-mill intro. I'm not as familiar with anime as Meg is, but a lot of the times it might be like a little highlight or just some. Like Dragon Ball Z, yeah, like Dragon Ball Z would be like, oh, you see Goku flying around. Maybe there's a clip of him turning into a gorilla or something. But in Baccano, like the things that happen, like the intro is super awesome. First of all, it has one of the best, I'd say, songs in general, but one of my favorite openings.
Oh yeah, the music in the show in general is fantastic. Yeah. It's jazzy and upbeat and just so fitting.
Yeah. But what happens in the introduction also pertains really well to what the show is. On
Without
top of
doubt.
You have the first episode where the vice president of the newspaper company is talking about the story and all the characters, but the intro, you see it every episode, and it's this little reminder of like this stuff's gonna come up. You don't know that at the time. You think, oh, this is just I'm just watching these characters be in character pose essentially, but that's not so, and you come to see these like and this is, I don't think this is a spoiler, but you see Isaac and Miria, the opening, he flips a coin and they go to rob a store. That comes back later on in the series and they talk about that. Or you see certain characters, the way they're framed in the introduction is genius to like their development or even their background later on,
like Ennis,
who is
reflected in a wine bottle.
Yeah. And I won't go into any more detail behind that, but I think if you watch the intro, I mean, I watched it without thinking about it. This is all retrospective, but I watched it and I was like, this, I felt that this was important, certain things that were being relayed, not just because I'm being introduced to the characters and they have these snazzy little freeze frames with the characters, and then they have
with
like Lad Russo in the name, or like Firo Portocenzo. But like the things they do or like where they are, it really lets you not only get a feel for the character, where they're from, but it also comes back to the story. And
definitely.
That's really cool. And I don't see that happening in anything that I've seen recently, animated, or not, TV show, movie. It's really interesting. I can't stress enough how just dazzled I was by it.
Definitely.
And I really have not many negative things to say about the show either. There's a few things that you brought up to me, but they're not major, right?
Oh no, they're not major at all. I would say that the few negatives, if you're watching it for the first time, it can be a little bit disorienting to try to keep the timelines and the character allegiances and everything straight in your head. Mm-hmm. It can be kind of easy to mix up similar looking characters, like you have Berga Gondor and Gustavo Runarata, who are big guys with very square structured bodies, and they do look different, but the first time you're watching it, there's so many characters, it's kind of like, wait, who is, like, this guy wanted to kill this guy, but then who's who? I know you mentioned that occasionally, that sometimes Dallas Genoward and Luck Gondor were kind of hard to keep straight,
or even in broad terms, trying to keep straight who was a part of what crime family,
right?
Or what, or even that a crime family was a crime family,
right?
And I think that's something that I just have, that's a problem of my own rather than the show. But the show, it's a little hard, I'll admit, and I was confused at times, but it wasn't anything that ever interrupted the flow for me. Like, it wasn't ever like, I don't know what is going on right now. It was just like, wait, who is that character again? And if you watch it with someone, you can ask them maybe, or, within the episode you'll find out who. The one thing I guess I would bring up as a complaint were because the characters, there's so many awesome, really fun, memorable characters.
Yeah.
Some of them just aren't as interesting as other ones in the main cast, at least. I can't
Yeah.
remember. There's probably at least in the intro. What do you think? Like maybe 10 or 12 people mentioned in the main cast.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say, like all of them are really cool, and then there's a couple to me that aren't just as fun. But that's not really the fault of the character, I think.
Right. Well, I mean, I personally thought that Eve Genoard's story while she was looking for her brother Dallas were a little bit slow.
Yeah.
Because you go from these scenes of like super action bloody, people getting dismembered on trains and, the hijinks of Isaac and Miria being like their doofy selves, to very slow scenes of this girl like looking at photographs of her brother or just going and sitting and having a conversation with an information broker.
Yeah,
She's not necessarily a bad character. I actually think it would have been interesting to see more of her motivation and character in other circumstances, but it could serve as kind of a breather, a way to kind of step back from the action and reorient yourself. Although I definitely did find it slower.
It's definitely slow compared to you have a train robbery going on, guns going off, and cars running over people, and it's like a big climax, and then right before it's about to explode, they'll go to maybe like Eve Genoard's story. So I guess maybe suspense-wise, that's actually a good thing to make sure that everything doesn't go spoiled too quick.
Right.
But at the same time, like you said, it is slow, and when you have these these situations where you want to see how it ends, and you have to wait to watch this part, and it's not even bad, but it's just different.
Yes.
And I don't think Eve's a bad character, but compared to maybe Jacuzzi or Firo or Innes, it's like
I don't think she's going to be anyone's favorite character.
Yeah, it'd be like someone made a really good dish of filet mignon, and then like you're like, this was the best meal I ever had, and then someone comes in like, I just made pigs in a blanket. It's like, oh, well, pigs in a blanket are good too.
I guess I'll take that.
I did just have the best meal of my life.
Yeah. So would you recommend this show, Daniel?
I would highly recommend it. I think I told you many times, the show oozes with coolness. It's got some of the best music ever. The animation is so fluid, and there's a couple times where there's CG used, but I think it actually helps it. It makes things look more unsettling. Character dynamics are amazing. It's really awesome. What about you?
Well, I considering that I have seen this show probably like 7 or 8 times by now, I would definitely recommend it. The animation is fantastic. Some of the fight scenes are just incredibly well done. They manage to capture like these really minute, movements or facial expressions, and just the way it's choreographed is amazing. It's definitely in my top 10.
Yeah, mine as well.
So unless I recommend it unless you're weak with gore, because there's a lot of blood and violence. Really pretty brutal violence too. There's torture, and a guy gets his fingers cut off within the first 5 minutes.
Yeah, in the first episode.
So yeah.
But it's also one last note. It's very accessible with only 16 episodes, and that's the main series. Unless you're looking for the books, but the main series of the anime is, I'd say, easy to get a hold of. You don't have to watch 300 episodes. There's no filler.
Yeah.
It's a very, well done show, well executed. I can't recommend it enough.
Same. All right. Well, if you think that we missed anything, or if you have any other comments you would like to share with us, then please leave a comment, or give us a like or a subscribe if you like what we're doing. So it would help. And thanks for watching.
We are Discount Ramblepants, and everyone remember that everyone has a gun in their heart.
Thank you for watching.
Happy birthday.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.